Everyone, I'm Najeeb Baqui, founder and managing director of Tinsley Park, a private equity platform and an advisory firm. Welcome to another episode of Tinsley Park Talks, a global networking and leadership platform where we interview industry legends from finance to tech and from policy experts to intellectuals. In these digital interviews, we discuss great ideas around investing, entrepreneurship, solving complex problems, and all other lessons of life. Today, I would like to introduce you to Simin Sun. Simin is a corporate partner at Haynes and Boone, LLP. He assists clients in connection with complex mergers and acquisitions, both on the buyer and seller side, especially those that contain a technology or international component, and corporate security matters, especially those that involve capital raises through public or private equity or debt. He also advises on general corporate matters and strategic planning. Simin grew up in China, but came to the United States very early on in his life. He studied finance for his undergraduate at the University of Texas at Austin and got his law degree from prestigious University of Pennsylvania. After graduating from University of Pennsylvania, he joined Haynes and Boone LLP as an associate and has been there his entire law career. He lives in Houston with his wife, Elizabeth, and their two children. He's very active in the Houston Asian American community and devotes significant time and resources to help out the Chinese Community Center in Houston. I think he does more than just the Chinese community. And I'll tell you why. Full disclosure, Simin is actually a good friend as well as an advisor to Tinsley Park, where we've worked on a number of projects together. He recently became a father to his second. So congrats to Simin and welcome to the show, man.
Thanks, Najeeb. Thanks for having me here. Typically, we don't usually meet this way. We usually meet in a popular bar somewhere having some mojitos or some scotches. So
don't tell my mom that, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm glad we're able to connect this way and very honored that you invited me to join you for Tinsley Park Talks.
No, I'm honored to have you. Absolutely. Yeah, we've all obviously go back a long way, Simin, and thanks for joining me on a Friday when I know you'd be rather spending time with your newborn and your other daughter. So I'll just jump right into it. This is obviously your second episode ever, and I'm really humble that you are my second guest. So Simin, I do a typical format here. I bring guests and I just really get to know them, and I want to share with the audience also kind of who you are as a person. So why don't you tell us who Simin Sun is, your story, how did you get here, what led you to become a partner at Haynes and Boone? You went to school for finance and then you chose law school. So just share the journey with us.
Thanks, Najeeb. And if you ask my parents, they never really wanted me to be a lawyer. Both of my parents are engineers, so they really wanted me to be an engineer as well. But once they figured out that my math skills were, let's say, not up to speed, that route kind of closed for me. But in terms of why becoming an attorney, I mean, for me, it always just seemed that I was going to do something related to business. I went into undergrad for business school. And while I was there, one of the things that really drew my attention was I actually worked part-time at a law firm as just a typical file clerk. And there just sort of, I really enjoyed seeing what they did. And that really prompted me to really think about law as a potential career. It also didn't help that during that time, I was planned to become an investment banker, but that was also during the time of the '08 crash. So
did you graduate in 2006 or 7?
No, I graduated undergrad in 2008.
Oh,
so
okay, got it. Yeah.
So that
I do know. Yeah, I remember.
I had planned on going to do investment banking and then going to law school after that, but with the crash happening, I hastened my law school route to try to come out of it a little bit ahead of the curve there. But yeah, I mean, I'm just really excited. Sort of during my law school career, working, what really prompted me to become a corporate M&A attorney was really working with the sort of clients that they have in that I worked with in law school. One of my most memorable clients I worked with was this food incubator, and what they did was they helped individuals, especially lower income individuals, try to set up restaurants in the Philadelphia area. And what they did was, as an incubator, they allowed them to use their sort of state-of-the-art kitchens that met all of the regulatory approvals, and be able to cook the food there and then actually serve it through a sort of a delivery system. But it was just a way for individuals who are amazing home chefs to actually be able to monetize that. And me helping the food incubator get through various regulatory approvals, customer contracts for people renting space, et cetera. That really made it clear that I really wanted to be a corporate attorney. And during my time, I've had a pretty diverse, I'll say, practice. I actually started off primarily as an oil and gas attorney. During that time period, everyone and their mom was doing debt offerings. As an oil and gas company, I was doing 2 debt offerings a week, and then all of a sudden that crashed, right? And that's when I transitioned.
It took a while
Yeah.
before it crashed. It became one of the longest debt bubbles ever.
Yes, lots of people were making lots of money for a long time, but
right.
but then the bond market for oil and gas crashed, and I had to sort of develop a new type of practice. And what really developed after that was a sort of a international technology focused practice, and really working not so much with oil and gas companies, but really smaller companies who were developing technologies, who had manufacturing, industrial, et cetera. So really getting out of the oil and gas space and developing a broader practice.
Yeah, it's it's incredible. I've been in the Texas, Houston market. I guess we started our career around the same time because we're about the same age.
Yeah.
And while I lived in New York before the world fell apart in 2008, I came back right after when oil and gas was probably one of the only industries in the entire country that was doing somewhat, I would say, was thriving. It was more than somewhat doing well, because everything was so bad in 2008 and 9. Oil and gas is so yeah, everybody was wanting to jump in. A lot of Wall Streeters moved down to Houston and Dallas because the economy was doing good here because of oil and gas, and the multiplier effect was strong, with population growth highest in all 4 major cities within Texas. And since then, we've just seen such a tremendous growth. Just behind me here in Houston, the skyline looks different than what it looked like 2009. And the periphery of Houston, downtown, Midtown, Montrose, is completely different place here. So we've come a long way. So Simon, tell us about your current practice at Haynes and Boone, and maybe share a little bit about the firm as well. Obviously, they're very well known in the South. Would love to hear from you, sort of your experience there, and then come back to your current practice within Haynes and Boone.
Yeah, so certainly, Najeeb, and you're right. I think it was during that time. I remember in 2008. I was definitely still in law school, but when I had gotten out, we were giving seminars to New York people about the jargon you would use in oil and gas field.
Right.
Everyone was interested in trying to get into oil and gas. But to talk a little bit about Haynes and Boone, Haynes and Boone is a national law firm, though we are obviously strongest in Texas. That's Haynes and Boone's roots, especially in Dallas, where they started. Full service firm with really specialties in lots of areas. bankruptcy, appellate, what we do, corporate M&A. We have, besides just nationally, we have offices around the world. We have one in Mexico City, in London, in Shanghai. Again, the history of Haynes and Boone has predominantly been mostly oil and gas, with offices in places which were generally considered energy capitals. But there's definitely been a focus and a shift to get more involved in technology, to find more ways to integrate not just oil and gas, but energy as a whole. And energy itself is transforming from just a pure E&P play or midstream. There's lots of various ancillary items.
Simon, for our audience that don't know what E&P is, can you tell them what that means? E&P?
Yeah.
So
exploration and production.
Correct.
Yeah. So again, very oil and gas focused, but the focus now is really trying to be beyond that, and that's I think consistent with what Houston is doing as well, right? Houston is not just wanting to be a oil and gas capital, but really an energy capital and supporting the ecosystem for all types of energy, whether that's actual production, exploration and production, or it's actually technology that relates to that. And in my practice really now is trying to help those individuals who are part of that ecosystem find a way to develop and grow, whether that's helping them raise startup money, whether that's doing their Series A or B, whether that's being on the buyer side and on the private equity side and purchasing these companies that are sort of growing to be able to help them take it to the next level or find a more attractive exit opportunity in the future. I think really right now, there's just a lot of capital that sort of needs to be deployed. And Houston is one of the best cities to find those opportunities, as I think, as we'll talk later, there's just a great energy right now in Houston that really explode onto the global scene as the energy capital of the world.
No, absolutely. No, I think I can say it with certainty that we've definitely, Houston, we've been very resilient throughout the long-term cycles that we've seen. And, in addition to just the sort of typical macro long-term cycles that happen, well, we obviously had the biggest one in 2008. And then coronavirus definitely was another really unforeseen one. But then we also had these energy, oil and gas life cycles and debt cycles, or just business cycles rather, more frequent and unpredictable than most other industries, unfortunately. And I think while that is that has been a negative to our city, on the positive side, I think it really pushed entrepreneurs, professionals in all fronts, not only professionals working in oil and gas companies, also attorneys like yourself, right? Legal professionals, broadening and diversifying their focus, more diversifying outside of purely energy, while it's a very vast and complex and diversified in itself of an industry, as well as investors, investment professionals like myself, right? In pivoting. So we are resilient. We're a resilient city. And it's great to hear that Haynes and Boone has also been on that path of resiliency and your practice there as well. Throughout this journey that you've had so far, and I'm sure I can share a story or two, in your career, you must have seen some more stories of things that have gone wrong. Can you share some more memorable stories with us?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when you look back at your career, the things you remember are the times when things went wrong, and usually when they went horribly wrong, because those are the ones that make you lose the most sleep, but also they're the ones that really stick out in your mind as things that really have marked the passage of time in your career. So I do have two really great stories that also really serve as cautionary tales for people who are, developing their company, growing it, et cetera. And really, the first one has to do with just being really, really careful about when you try to create legal documents yourself, or you try to create them via LegalZoom, to actually really understand what you're doing. And, it's one of those situations where it's sometimes better to ask someone who knows what they're doing and try to nip it in the bud than to try to save a little bit of money at that time, which will really bite you in the butt later. One of the examples is I had a client of ours who gave a consulting agreement using sort of a LegalZoom standard document there. And that standard document somehow had it where there was an equity grant. The client, not truly understanding what that meant, had inadvertently gave this consultant a 5% equity in his company. Now, the client didn't really realize it, operated for 20 years, was going to have a really nice exit of, a couple $100 million. Turns out 5% of that is now going to go to this consultant who 20 years ago, he gave a 5% equity share into because he was filling out a LegalZoom document. And there was a thing for equity grant in that LegalZoom document, and him not realizing, he just thought, oh, maybe this was, 5% at that time, or just X amount of shares. But no, it was just a 5% interest in the company. So, that consultant, and for us, we were on the selling side, we had to disclose this to the buyer. The buyer was like, we don't care how you guys divvy up the money, but like, this person needs to get paid because we're going to get sued if they don't, right? This person completely forgot about it, right? But they had this legal right, this legal document, and they got an amazing windfall 20 years down the fact, right? So that's one example of, I think, people just not really understanding and just trying to, save some money up front, ended up costing them 15, 20 million down the road, right? The other one that I think is actually probably more common and happens all the time is, especially if you're a starting company, that you just kind of issue options willy-nilly, where you're giving sort of, there's that joke where startup companies, like, toilet paper is more expensive than options. I mean, just everyone's getting options everywhere. And really, there are very strict rules about how you can issue options. And we had a deal many years ago where we had sold a company, and this company had issued options without sort of following any of those rules. And because they were in breach of all those rules, they had a tax liability that was, 10, 15 million on what was about a $60, $70 million deal. So it was, because when you issue options improperly, not only do you have to pay taxes on those options, you get penalized for issuing the options improperly. So again, just one of those things that unfortunately probably happens more often than you would think. And, that was one of the more extreme cases where so much value really was lost for the client because, again, early on, they just didn't probably think about how to properly do those things. And Najeeb, as you know, if you were to ever lose $20, $30 million, you would probably be not too happy about that.
Absolutely no. Good. Those are some. Yeah, there's a lot of crazy stories out there like that. Sometimes you do see some of these early stage kind of equity sharing agreements done with consent as well. I've seen a company that went from zero revenue to 100 within 3 years, and it was a private equity transaction that I worked on, and they have had a law firm actually that advised them pro bono, and they had convinced them to give them 5% of the company. So when the recap happened, they were handsomely rewarded for that, the law firm. But everybody in the, in the deal team tend to think that was pretty expensive.
Yeah.
Pro bono rates. But interesting. And, speaking of deals, private equity, VC, the M&A market, you see it all. What are you seeing in the market today? How would you describe it?
Yeah, I think the market is really interesting right now because I think there's really two types of companies, right? There's the first type, which I classify as the unfortunate ones, are the ones who really got hammered by COVID, who really, because of COVID, really affected their core businesses. These are some of the ones which, during that time, lost customers, couldn't operate. Maybe that might be ancillary to, say, like a restaurant business or something like that. These companies that really have struggled, and while the PPP loan helped them stabilize for a little bit, really, they're at a stage where their valuation might have been, say, 50 million pre-COVID, might be 5 million now post-COVID, right? And they're desperate for cash. And as such, they're getting bought very cheaply from private equity funds, from VC funds, et cetera, with very, very little leverage, right? In the sense of they can't really negotiate in any of the items, any of the terms of those deals. So I'll classify that. Obviously, you would always have that in any sort of market. I think you're seeing it a little bit more now after COVID and after the couple of years that we've had. But I think what's more interesting and really more optimistic is on the other side is because there is a lot of money, I think, floating around, companies that are doing really well are getting insane valuations. Companies that previously might have gotten 8x valuations are getting 11, 12x valuations in some of the deals that I'm working for. We were late last year, we sold a company and as an auction process, and the buyer said, we will accept the purchase agreement you give us as long as we get it, which I've never had happen before, where they did not change anything about our purchase agreement. They said, we will take it as is. We just want this deal that badly. And I think that's sort of really interesting in that front, where if you're a really good company, you can sort of get any terms that you want. And some of the terms that are really interesting, I think, is really there's little to no escrow that's really being used. Typically, an escrow you use to hold back in case there's something wrong with the company. Buyers are kind of just saying, we'll take it as is. We'll accept whatever risk there is, to the extent that, besides the escrow, you're going to see other things such as just very limited reps that needs to be given, lower non-competes, just all of these things that are really seller favorable. Now, one thing I will say is part of the valuation drive that's causing these higher multiples is that we're seeing that buyers are more willing, especially private equity buyers, to offer as consideration, not just cash, but also rollover equity into the private equity fund itself. So typically, private equity used to be very much all about control, making sure that they're had 100% control of the business, and their fund themselves were very tightly controlled by sort of their group and their LPs. They're becoming much more open to allowing, say, if you do a $100 million deal, they might pay 80 million in cash and then 20 million in actual stock from the private equity fund.
Yeah, that's interesting. Did you see any crazy rollover amount like this pre-COVID, or is this just something that you're seeing as a result of just this frothiness in the market?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing this is really the desire from entrepreneurs, because I think entrepreneurs themselves understand that even if they get paid a bunch of cash, they need to then turn around and figure out how to deploy that cash anyway, right? Because no one wants to sit on $20 million worth of cash. Right. They need to figure out how to deploy it. And in part of the negotiations, an easy way for them to do that is to deploy it with the private equity fund that actually purchased their company. Now, Najeeb, you might have some thoughts of whether that's sort of the right approach for entrepreneurs or not.
Yeah, so one of the things Tinsley Park Partners, so to go back, Tinsley Park Partners was formed 2.5 years ago, and it was primarily to solve a problem for a business owner, a business owner of substantial assets. Can't disclose the number, but it was pretty decent size for a private equity transaction in the sort of middle market sense. What we were doing when we were launching Tinsley Park Partners was that we're using existing assets, in our case, of one of the partners who wanted to transition from being a business owner to being a private equity or an investment professional, right? Which is a pretty typical desire for someone that has been a successful entrepreneur for many years. Why? Because it accomplishes a few big things. It accomplishes diversification for the business owner. It accomplishes often an intellectual curiosity to work on a larger variety of things outside of just day-to-day monotony of running a business. So you have this financial need for diversification, intellectual need for having the ability to do more things than that you're doing, and then ultimately you create yourself another asset on its own as you sell your business to the next investor, right, through this fund. So that's what we were solving, which was so unique because in your example, these entrepreneurs are doing deals with PE firms, VC firms, and then they're going into these deals, selling 50, 60, 70% of their businesses. But they're still remaining as this day-to-day operator and no involvement in the fund level. And you mentioned that the rollovers are happening even at the fund level with those types of transactions, even when these entrepreneurs don't have any involvement or ownership or legal relationship with that entity. They're just in that operating entity. They have their B shares, you want to call it. They're behind the preferred equity, the LP and the GPs, right? So what I was solving is I was creating a GP position for an owner operator, business owner, right in the beginning of the very first institutional recapitalization in our case that has ever been done in these assets that were both owned by this person. And that one of the most important elements also for the owner operator was to remain in majority control. In your example, you as an entrepreneur on key decisions like capital structure, exit timing, strategic initiatives, whether it's add-on acquisitions or organic growth. Also, you lose the autonomy to really continue to guarantee yourself to be a CEO until you see through the entire life cycle and that finally the exit of the company. You may be replaced if you're viewed differently by the VC or the PE differently in the sense that you're not the CEO they once thought you were. So I was solving that problem too. I said, hey, let's have your cake and eat it too. So that's what I think is an alternative that I can offer at Tinsley Park Partners. So we're actively discussing opportunities with owner operators that don't know about this option of recapitalizing their business, getting growth capital to grow with the vision of a 2 to 3 to 5 year window to exit. But after the exit, transforming themselves into an entrepreneur with that diversification already in place, the governance and the structure already created behind them as they were recapping and going through the transition. And of course, working with us, myself, founder, and my partners that are helping keep that fund going while the operator, the business owner, just focuses on operations. And of course, learn the, functionalities and the involvement and responsibilities of how to become a GP. So at the end of it all, when we do the investment with this owner operator, grow the companies and sell, the owner operator has this optionality. This is not an obligation, but we would like to say that we have this unique, proposition for a business owner that you're not going to find in the regular PE/VC market. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely, Najeeb. I mean, I think, for people who are selling their companies to PE shops and getting rollover equity, everything you're saying is right. You're at best a LP that has sort of no rights. In fact, I represent a PE fund where the shares that we issue on these rollover are Class B shares, but guess what? The Class A shares has 10x the votes, right? So that's not an uncommon structure for PE funds and rollover equity. Or even worse, at least in that structure, you get when there's a payout that happens, you share equally, even if there's a 10x voting preference. I've been in part of PE firms and deals where you'll get shares that are at somehow a lower preference than the shares that the PE fund has. And not only just a lower preference, if you might be lower by multiple tiers where the PE firm might get their money and then the management of that PE firm gets their money from their management fees, and maybe the employees of the PE firm get their payment first, and you might be on the fourth waterfall. So again, it really is deal dependent on how all of those terms work out. But, one of the models that you guys at Tinsley Park was trying to work through is to figure a way to actually give more power and give more autonomy to the CEOs, founders, majority shareholders of the company. And, truthfully, if you don't want that, then maybe that's not the right model. Maybe you just want to do the passive investment. But if, in my experience, people who are entrepreneurs who never had or people who ran their own companies, they haven't had a boss in a long time, right?
Right.
To all of a sudden have a boss, and a PE boss at that, many don't take well to that.
No, absolutely. And, the topic of control and having a boss, it's an important one. Sometimes it's the big elephant in the room nobody wants to talk about. Look, our solution that I just described is not the panacea to the holy grail of being a private equity professional. You've got to be able to that transition for the owner operator is still going to be a new environment that they have to really quickly assimilate and have the sort of mindset, emotionally, mentally prepared to navigate through, because we're gonna work with this owner operator alongside on a lot of decisions. While they have control of the assets, we equally also have similar. So we're their partners, right? They're not our boss. We're not their boss. So while you're not going to have a boss over you who's going to tell you what to do, we would want to work with somebody that's a team player. We want to work somebody that understands what it means to go from this level to that level, and what kind of caliber and attitude and sort of collaboration and emotional intelligence you need, right? So going back to your war stories examples of things happening when you form something without being thoughtful and astute in the way you document stuff, we're also of the we're also very cognizant that in this partnership, it's not as simple as just talking about, hey, this is definitely a better option for the owner operator, but you've got to be able to work in a team and swallow your ego. That's a big one.
It's not for everyone, but for the right person, it's a very unique and potentially lucrative alternative that fits sort of what they want out of an exit, right?
Yes. And you know why I say all those things, and it may come across as being very direct, but it is a very real dynamic. And why are all those other factors than just the financial factor important? It is because we're long-term investors. We're looking for partners, right? These are people we're essentially going to be married with. They're going to be married to us. So working day to day with these people and us, you need to have a certain, even though it's not a control position, you got to be able to work with others. And the other thing is the world keeps changing. And we also talked about how in the last 10 years, just in our backyard, how many cycles we've gone through, right? So it's even more important to have a level-headed mindset, right, as a team. And that's what the culture that I want to instill in Tinsley Park. And our team, everybody in our team are of the same mindset. And we're looking for, like-minded individuals that understand that in even difficult moments, you've got to be able to adapt and adjust and be even calmer when the storm hits, right?
Yeah. And
there's going to be many more of that. But those are some of the things that you don't want to talk about in a money shot graph or an advertisement, but those are things that I think about a lot.
Well, and I think those are the right things to think about. And like the goal for both you and I is to sort of educate people about just alternatives, right? To understand that, especially when you talk with PE firms, VC firms, they'll tell you the world has to be this way. And sometimes it is, right? Depending on your leverage, sometimes that is the way, but sometimes there are alternatives. And you guys at Tinsley Park are trying to be one of the solutions to a very real problem that people who are exiting have.
Right. Speaking of solving problems, our topic today is about investing, fundraising, with a slight bias towards tech, because you can't avoid what's happening in the tech universe with all the huge raises, exits, strategic acquisitions, financial acquisitions, global expansion. The TAM just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and the valuation just keeps soaring larger and larger. Why don't you share your views on, firms like Tesla and Oracle moving their headquarters to Texas? Why are they doing that?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a few reasons for why they're doing it. Many of them economic, some of them legal and regulatory. I mean, from an economic standpoint, I think it makes sense that an office building in San Francisco is going to be significantly more expensive than an office building even in Austin or Houston. Just from an economic standpoint, that's a really simple calculus. Also, because the cost of living is lower, you have to pay employees less here. That said, you still have an incredibly talented pool of employees in both Houston, Austin, and Dallas, of incredibly well-educated, tech-savvy individuals who are capable of working at these tech companies, right? So there's a wide opportunity to get really talented individuals. And then one of the more interesting, I think, legal reasons people are moving into Texas is that it's just easier for businesses from a legal standpoint to conduct their business. And what that means is the regulatory approvals are generally a little bit easier, and definitely a lot easier than California. I mean, California, in a lot of ways, is sort of its own country legally, with how many restrictions and regulations that they have, which you don't have here in Texas. And I think, especially in tech, one of the really big ones is the enforceability of non-competes. I mean, for people who don't know, if you sign a non-compete in California, I wouldn't say 100% of the time, but it's sort of generally accepted that the non-compete in California is not really going to be enforceable. And tech non-competes are a very big part of the story, as you don't want your employees who might have developed a really critical piece of software or IP for you to immediately go down the road and open up their own shop or work for your competitor. Here in Texas, non-competes are generally more enforceable than, I mean, definitely more than California, but here in Texas, there's definitely more enforceability of the non-competes. And really, I think those factors, especially with the ease and the cost, really makes Texas a really attractive place for people to try to set up headquarters at. And I don't see that trend moving anywhere because I don't see California getting cheaper or less, having less regulatory approvals. And I don't see Texas sort of either. I mean, Texas, of course, all of us who live here do understand it is getting more expensive than it was 10 years ago. But
Absolutely.
Again, even if it is more expensive, we are still a far cry from New York, California, et cetera. And again, the ease of the regulatory approvals and enforceability of non-competes being very employer friendly, they're all in favor of tech companies moving here.
Great points. Did you mention non-unions as a factor as well?
Yeah, no, definitely. That's a great point, Najeeb. I mean, in Texas, really, there's no unions here.
Right.
I mean, definitely in California, there's significantly more unions, and especially tech unions of really skilled labor. It's funny because I think the unions in California are much less unions of, let's say, the auto workers or what's the current company that's on strike right now?
Auto company?
I can't remember. There was a current one that was on strike that's slipping my mind. But in California, the unions are much more specialized. They're much more unions of high tech, high IQ, highly educated, and very niche, right? So it might be a union of software developers for a certain type of software, right? And the reason they have that is it keeps artificially all of their prices high because you can't hire a specific type of individual that fills a role without paying these high prices. So Texas, you sort of have none of that. Unions are incredibly weak here in Texas to the point of really non-existence, right? In my 10 plus years, I've not done any deals with any unions here in Texas. Mm-hmm. So definitely an advantage for the employer.
Yeah. What kind of tech companies are you seeing overall in sort of the Texas Triangle or major cities in Houston, Austin, Dallas? How would you differentiate them if there was a way to differentiate?
I think with tech, you definitely see all sorts of tech in all of the three cities. But in my experience, generally the ecosystems have solidified around a certain type of tech, where if you are going to have a certain type of tech, for example, if you're going to do a fintech company, right? Typically, that's going to be something that is easier to be done in Dallas than it is going to be done in Austin or in Houston. Part of the reasons, for example, fintech, there's a lot of banks in Dallas, so that's one of the major benefits for fintech there. There's also just sort of the history, the infrastructure, the wealth to sort of do fintech. That's just a more attractive product there. In Austin, really what you're seeing in Austin is predominantly a lot of software. That's Austin generally has been a sort of VC hub itself. In right. Houston, in Texas, I think overall Texas is becoming more VC tech friendly. Austin has sort of always been that, but on the backbone of that has been mostly software. And really, you're going to see the disruptive tech that's in Austin. If you're going to see a Google or a Facebook type of company, it's probably going to come out of Austin. It's not going to come out of Houston or Dallas. And therefore, what that means is if we're going to see IPOs, we're probably going to see IPOs out of Austin companies as well. In Houston, Houston has its own very unique sort of tech bubble. And really the tech you see predominantly in Houston is energy tech, climate tech, industrial tech, tech that really is focused on sort of solving a sort of very specific problem for a very specific type of consumer, right? So you're not going to see something come out of Houston that's going to, for example, make it onto a superstore market and affect the average consumer. What you'll see is you might have certain type of software that helps reduce drag in the pipeline, right? Or you might be able to have a certain type of patent software that does AI for seismic activity. Something that's, again, a much more niche, a much more specific focus in Houston, still very important for the ecosystem. But again, I think much more energy focused here in Houston. And, as people are starting to think about the type of company they want to start, it's really important to understand because having the right ecosystem means having the right mentors, right contacts, the right investors.
Correct.
It's much easier, for example, in Houston to convince someone why this technology related to oil and gas or energy makes sense than to try to convince them why, for example, a fintech product such as, oh, this will help you diversify your portfolio. That's an easier sell in Dallas than it is in Houston, and vice versa, right? You try to sell oil and gas in Dallas, they're going to be less interested or maybe less knowledgeable about it.
That's a very good point. I think it's an accurate depiction of the ecosystem in each of these cities. I think it's important to highlight something here, and that's these cities individually are not necessarily constrained from being more diverse in their in the types of startups or innovation that they create, right? So we talked about Houston being more clean tech focused, biotech not so much, and we have the largest medical what do you call it? The Med Center is the largest medical facility overall. Like it employs somewhere near as many people in Manhattan, in all of Manhattan, in just our medical center here in Houston. I don't know if that stat is still valid or not, but it's a lot. It's just a very huge ecosystem. Relative to that, there's not a lot of innovation happening, not a lot of startup or VCs or investors that are biotech centric, right? And the point I want to make in this is it's not because there aren't enough R&D and innovation and knowledge base and resources for such innovation to take place, but you keep seeing them in Boston and Southern California more often than here, and that's a function of these investors, like you said, right? One of my mentors, we were having, and he said he met one of the largest private wealth managers of Houston that manages, a lot of wealthy families in town. There's a lot of money here, right? A lot of money in Houston. But it's all oil and gas money. And these families don't understand, no disrespect to these families, but it is a fact that there is a challenge and a headwind when it comes to fueling innovation in this most diverse city, Houston, okay? Because the capital here is just too shy to diversify outside of their comfort zone. And I'm a believer that's going to change. I think it's going to change as a result of a couple of things. And this is just me coming up with this idea randomly. I think one function of it is with the advent of new technology, blockchain, manipulating data more efficiently through AI, storage capabilities, just the exponential growth that's happened in so many areas of tech. What it's doing is it's creating this convergence and interoperability of not only different technologies working together, but also different industries coming together. Because at the end of the day, a business is a business, right? You have customers, you have a product or a service. It's just different supply chains and different logistics and certain business models and audiences. But you have the population here to sell anything. And so I think as a result of that driver of, of technology becoming more sophisticated, that convergence is going to happen. And the other part of it from the investor side, from these, we talked about these high net worth family offices. I think as we see the next generation taking over from those, family offices, the younger generation, hopefully they are going to be more open-minded to and be able to decipher through the new opportunities that could also exist here. I think we have so much potential in Houston, just with the sheer population growth and all the institutions that we have here, and all the other supporting economies outside of energy. I think we're between 35 to 40% of the Houston GDP. This was probably
right
2 years ago. Maybe it's smaller now. We're diversifying. So anyhow, those are just some of my thoughts. So with the interest of time, maybe jump to the next question. What are some, major pitfalls, entrepreneurs should avoid?
Yeah, and again, the cautionary tale I told before, I think just a clear example of some of this, but I'll just give some very simple ones. And the first one I'll say is to get a lawyer friend, right? They don't have to, you don't have to hire a lawyer. I've been Najeeb's friend much longer than I've been his attorney, right? But Najeeb has, just having a lawyer friend, having someone you can bounce ideas around, just, things that you're thinking about. It's just helpful that even if they're not your attorney, they'll be able to, all lawyers will naturally, if they see a problem, they'll tell you about it, right? So just having a lawyer friend, I think, is super helpful. The second thing is really making sure that you pick the right partners. I can't tell you how many horror stories I have of individuals who had great ideas, had great chemistry at the beginning, and 6 months down the road, they hate each other. One person's trying to get too greedy. One person's doing nothing. It's really important to pick the right partners to do that. And in concert with that is you have to also make sure that you have your documents in place so that if you do pick the wrong partners, you have ways to remove them. You have ways to make sure that they don't just permanently sink your company, or you have to give them a huge payout to make sure that they go away, right? It's really important to not do things on a handshake and a smile, to really, at the very least, think about the ways that things can go wrong. Especially really important, since we're talking about tech, is just to make sure that your tech is protected, right? Make sure that you had someone patent, if it's a tech that can be patented, to have it patented, to get things copyrighted. Again, IP is the lifeblood of tech companies. And if you don't have protected IP, then you really don't have a company. Two other things really just to help think about. The other one is keeping your corporate records clean. Clean corporate records show competence. Being able to show competence really makes it much easier for investors to come in the future, but also it just avoids problems down the road. Part of the issue with the options story I told was just bad corporate records. Poor corporate records were not kept. And if those things aren't properly kept, it can bite you in the future. And then lastly, always be thinking about what your next step is. And for most companies, that's about getting to the next round of investors, to develop something, to then get to a next round and then eventually an exit, right? So as long as you keep thinking about what your next step is and really thinking about how you can get to that next step in terms of the investor base you need, the contacts you need, the suppliers you need, just keep that in mind, because it's really easy to be complacent. But in this world that's always moving, the minute you become complacent, someone's going to overtake you. So just always keeping your eye on the future and really understanding what you need to get to that next level.
Great advice. Great advice. More advice. We need more advice from you. Simon, what advice do you have for your younger self when you were, or young people that would like to be like you?
Yeah, I think one of the things, and I'm sure the GB can attest to this as well, the number one thing you have to find with your job and your career is you have to be passionate about it, right? You have to really care and enjoy what you're doing. I mean, Najeeb, I know when you told me that you were going to start Tinsley Park and you were going to follow your passion to do so, I was very proud of you, because it takes a lot of guts to do that. It is not easy to leave a stable job. And to everyone here, I'll let you know Najeeb has offered for me to join him multiple times, and I have not been brave enough to accept his offer. So,
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd say you have to be very passionate about your job. You have to enjoy it, or else long term, because your job is going to be 60-70% of what you spend your time on. And if you don't enjoy it, you're going to be unhappy. The other thing I tell, especially for younger minorities, is it's really important that you have to set boundaries of what you're willing to accept and what you're not willing to accept, right? And what that means is, especially, I'll say more in the legal profession, really setting boundaries on the type of work that you're going to do. What that means is it's very easy for you to be really good at something, and that's the only work that you do, but you can't advance your career if you're always doing junior level work or work that someone that's straight out of law school would be able to do. And I'm sure this applies to sort of many other professions where if you're never looking to, sort of with entrepreneurs, if you're never looking to the skills you need to become a partner, to become, whatever the next level is, and you're always developing the skills for what you need at your current level, then you're never going to advance in your career. So it's really important to, set the boundaries to make sure that you are doing the kind of work that you want to do, developing the skills you need to advance your career. And then lastly, I think really important is people are, especially minorities, are not great about self-promotion. I think both you and I, Najeeb, we do not have that problem. We gladly self-promote ourselves, but for other individuals, that might be an issue. And really, you could do all the great work in the world, but if no one knows that, then it's as if you didn't do great work. So be open. I mean, Najeeb, this was a great idea for us to be able to do this podcast, because this is, like you said, a great way for us to talk about the world, but also for the world to know who we are and get to know how great I am and how great you are as well.
Well, thank you for that, for a series of compliments there, Simon.
Of course.
Well, one of the quotes that I'm reminded by with this topic is Woody Allen's quote of 90% of success, or something of that high number. 90% or something of success is just purely showing up. Mm-hmm. So point taken. I think being out there, being visible, especially these days after COVID, everything went digital, everything went video. I wouldn't entertain this idea a couple of years ago. It's cool. I probably didn't have the guts to do it, but now you just start to realize that, you got to get on it with the world, man. The world's changing too quickly. We talked about technology today and what it's doing, how it's converging. Look, I'm trying to be a journalist now because of technology. Yeah. So that's what happens when you have convergence and with advancement in tech. So thank you for that great lessons of life and entrepreneurship. A lot of younger viewers here would benefit from that. And then finally, Simon, we're almost done here, but you're married with 2 kids, just had a newborn. What advice do you have for for fathers like you to balance between life and such a high demanding job that you have?
Well, I think first you just have to accept that you're not going to get a lot of sleep. That sleep is something that you might have to go into sleep debt for. But really, the true answer is I couldn't do this alone. I only do it because my wife is one of the most supportive persons in the world. She has enabled me to do as well as I have in my career. I can't even imagine what it would be like to have a wife that was not as supportive as my wife, Elizabeth. So that's the first part. The second part, I have to be so grateful to all of the mentors I've had along the way and just everyone who took the time to help me out throughout my career, to advance, to teach me the ropes while I was a young person. And now I have to be so appreciative of my team and the associates that I work with because, as you know, Najeeb, no man can do everything themselves, right? And you have a team and I have a team. And, to be able to have someone that you can trust to help you out, to do all the things, to double check the things that you're doing, all of those are so important. So I think anyone who's out there thinking that they can do everything themselves, you can do that to a certain point. But if you ever want to reach that level of being a great success, of a great company, you have to have a good team, both at work and at home, and really being able to trust those individuals to help you be successful in your career. And it's not easy, and it takes extra time to develop that team. And also, besides that team, developing relationships. Najeeb, how long have we known each other now? 5, 6 years? Even more,
Yeah,
maybe?
I think maybe 7 years. Yeah, time flies,
Yeah.
man.
I mean, I'm just
last couple of years don't count, but yeah,
yeah,
like
COVID
7
years
years.
kind of
Yeah.
throw things off. But besides all of that, it's just having good outside connections, good people that you trust, good people you want to work with. And really, the way I always think about it is if I can have my friends also be my clients, that's the best because you're working with people that you enjoy working with, people you trust, and people that, ultimately one of my criteria is I just want to have good people in my life, right? So I've known Najeeb for a long time, and that's because Najeeb, you're a great person, high integrity, really
Thank
important
you.
for and I think that's really important in
So
terms
are
of
you,
having
Simon? That's why we're friends.
yes Najeeb, with that, thank you so much for having me on your show. It's been a pleasure. I'm very honored that you invited me as your second guest. Thankfully, I didn't have the pressure of being your first guest. I think that would have been. But
Trust me, my first guest was amazing. I think I was the one under most pressure because I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. Still don't know what I'm doing. But this was a lot of fun, Simon. Pleasure. Have a great Friday. Next time we're gonna do what we couldn't do this afternoon, which is have a few cocktails.
Absolutely. Sounds great.
Take care, buddy.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.